The story begins with a girl asking if her sister was alright king, or says she was fine, but mentioned they needed to escape from that place. However, the warning with purple hair warns they wouldn't be able to flee after offending their empress, suggesting they surrender for having made a mistake. Frustrated to share with Sans of asking why it was a mistake since they had taken part in the movie's sex ceremony, where they saw her worshipping a person using the heaven and earth worship ritual, mentioning they had only asked a question out of curiosity, but this me that hunted. Moreover, the girl's sect, true to human lives, as if they were worthless, where was clearly a demonic sect. Then the woman with purple hair speak, saying she should know whom they were talking about, the emperor's his master, and a legendary supreme demon, where he was not only the empress's master but also the supreme demon of the south, asking if she dared to say that the supreme demon will be swallowed by heaven and earth, advancing on the mentioning that in their next life he should mind their own business with their mouth shut. At that very moment, lightning strikes in the middle of the competition. In your questions, what was happening, and if that was an earth dragon. Around that mountain a storm was occurring at its peak. An unknown figure appears among the clouds, a mammoth golden eyes appears, and his name is huge and former leader of the excellent anti-sect. The boy thinks the realm was still the same even after 100 years of seclusion, but it seemed that his body was sanctified, questioning he could be considered immoral, saying that this could be considered as successful breakthrough. People are surprised by the appearance of that man, that he makes a maneuver with it, hands striking them away. The girl of purple hair thinks there was an expert protecting the mentioning they should report to the sect master. Then the girl's rope flees, and the protagonist thinks that the power of his body was not bad at all. Looking around, he ends up noticing two women, wondering if there was someone on the mountain that he had just knocked down. Worry you questions if he hadn't heard anyone approaching them, suggesting to check. Landing on the ground, he asks if they were all right. Because of his descent, a gust of wind goes towards them, destroying a piece of a mountain. Some time later, Axio tells the protagonists when it happened, saying that the would you set was a name that sounded quite pleasant besides the title of empress, which is quite dominated. However, one could not kill someone just because they said something wrong, and of his disciple ruin Yahello with her, she wouldn't let that happen. Shell the mention that he was undoubtedly an expert and that his disciple must be a person of noble character. That the boy says that if they were all right he didn't mean to stay there anymore, and you must draw because he had something to do. Care affirms that he was really an expert because he disappeared in an instant, questioning if they would be so powerful the future. However, the girl's confused that her sister was desperate, kinda remembers the name the protagonist's disciple, mentioning that the emperors who was hunting them was also called Looney Innard. Going back to the past, one of the young man's disciples asks if he was really going to abandon them to enter a state of seclusion, but the protagonist tells the little girl not to worry because he had already killed all the rebels, and in the next 100 years no one would offend their sect. However, with tears in her eyes, she says she didn't accept that because she didn't want him to go away, but she tells her to stop it because he had exhausted all these energies just so they could live peacefully in the future, mentioning that he would protect them forever during an order that from that on all disciples should focus on improving their skills to restore the ancient glory of their sect, returning to the present the pretext. He says that, in just 100 years, the spiritual vein of the sect was revived, saying he would descend to take a closer look, mentioning that everything there was prosperous saw was worth letting his disciples gain experience. Looking to the side, he notices some wooden dolls, thinking that in the past they only saw things like talismans and pills, supposing that life was getting better. Seeing the statue, the boy wonders why that statue was so familiar, asking the seller which deity it represented, but the merchant becomes desperate, asking for his mercy. Say, and of the protagonist looked up, he would see better statue. Observing the giant statue in front of him, Shen wonders why that sculpture looks so much like him. Seen from the statue, he notices a writing, the signature from the would you sect, remembering that the woman he had see before and claimed she had been pursued by the sect. Then a man appears, saying that he was the guy who addressed as the statue of the deity, and went out robbing stores, spreading false rumors. A group of girls appear, saying that he disobeyed the law in broad daylight and should be executed. The protagonist is confused, questioning why wear in his own clothes could be considered against the law, mentioning that he won ass and questions, asking why there was a statue him there. However, people start attacking him, wanting a chain attack on the protagonists and restraining, and then at the same instead the boy breaks those chains, saying for them to let him finish speaking, leaving the girl surprised because the ability Her Majesty granted her was destroyed in an instant, remembering that she was the only one who could break their formation. Then she looks at another girl, Rain, with each other starting supposedly undress, leaving the protagonist embarrassing that seducing him would be useless. Then they start changing clothes, bawling before the protagonist, welcoming him, mentioning that he must be the venerable Xiu Shen, and then you should follow them to the tower because the emperors was waiting for him. Shen is reluctant, asking who was waiting for him. However, the girl tells you not to worry because when you go out there, he would understand everything. Sometime later, in the tower hall, an unknown figure asks if it was the protagonist who broke the golden law formation. The boy confirms, saying he was the leader of the actual Anji sect and his name was Yu Shin. Then of the saying, instead a girl jumps into his arms, saying that after 100 years, you to finally see him. Remembering or face, the protagonist recognizes her as that little girl who only knew how to cry, asking the girl to get off him, but the emperor says it wouldn't be possible. It was very painful for a way for his return service time, no matter what. The protagonists and Lu wouldn't let him go away. Should ask what she was talking about, asking the enter to get off with the girl. Questions at the protagonist would continue to be so ignorant, but it was all right because the more he behaved that way, the more she would like it. Observing the girl, she thinks that was the 9 turns portal, and before entering seclusion, it was the last movement. The protagonist taught her yen or mentions that after all these years you master all the spells he taught her, saying she was following his teachings just for the day they met, then using a skill the inner taishan next, saying that from that day they would stay together until death. That the same mom, the girl pulls out a dagger, asking Shinji make a promise to her, mentioning that you know he was strong, his body was not indestructible, and as she cut off his legs, the protagonist would not go anywhere, launching an attack on him, saying it would hurt only for a second, and after that they would be happy. However, the attack has no effect. Inner asks why did not cuts, since it was a dagger made a meteorite. Shen says that her attitude of never giving up on her goals was really her style, and his disciple was very diligent, so she should make progress like her master, launching a flame attack on the girl, mentioning that he was at master Yu after 100 years and yen or would always be in his heart. At the Stitchan is surprising the girl, who was half naked, asking if the protagonist really thought that way. Then blood starts coming out of his nose, and forming that the destroyed doctor style was very powerful. Answering your question, chances you're not change, suggesting she go change clothes, but yet or says he was lying, emphasizing that he had spoken for the sake of speaking, because the boy had said nothing about the promise they had made together, had forgotten everything, leaving the protagonist thoughtful about what he had said and remembering his past with her and his memories. You enter says that and said that those formations would not break, but still got hurt, having the boy saying she would not be able to marry anymore. But the protagonist says that Inner had defeated Blackberry, him being so young, and affirming that she was very beautiful and would stay with her forever, leaving the little girl and bears with what he had said, asking if that was true. Shen affirms, questioning if he had ever lied to her and that they would stay together forever. Returning to the present, the protagonist hugs his disciple, saying that nothing had changed and he had just arrived a little late. With tears on her face, she or her looks at the protagonist and Hobbs the boy, asking why it took him so long to arrive. Sometime later, you enter tells everything she had done over the years to Shed, mentioning that she had changed the name of the sect just to avoid being persecuted. Reluctant, the girl observes the tagging is asking if the promise they made before was still standing, remembering the promise he had made that he would be with everyone from the sect forever. She tells her not to worry because he would not break his promise, leaving the Inner embarrassed because she really agreed, so it could be considered a marriage promise. The protagonist mentions that since they had fulfilled their promise, they had something important to do. The girl confirms, say she would choose a favorable day, thinking it would be a wedding, that was not what she wanted, or rather to reunite with everyone from the sect. Ben of the same instant, one of the major rise to pass the report, saying that the celestial book had awakened, and all the sects joined forces to go to the city of change. You Shine is thoughtful about the name of that sect, thinking that before going into seclusion you forgot to take that book, though Amy and or says that the put belong to them, giving an order to get it, but at the same instead the protagonist asked away, saying he would get the book on his own. Some time later in the city of change, you a boy was distributing newspapers, claiming that the battle for the celestial book had begun. Approaching of protagonist the young man, as if you'd like a newspaper. However, the protagonist did not meet it, looking around a thing that 100 years ago that place used to be a forest city, but changed a lot, so he could not find the right way. But a paper doll the Inner are made for him, says that with her and command the protagonists would have no problem navigating the continent. Should mention that she had said that an escort would deliver him, that he was there just to get what was his, so he should not meet it. Then yet to respond, saying that when he was in seclusion, the Azure book was stored in that city, causing many disputes between families, as the X1U sect was weak and unable to recover. You enter took advantage and told everything about that celestial book to the world, causing a fight among the cultivators. Shen understands, affirming that a plan was well planned, leaving the girl happy, saying she had reached her destination and her escort was in front of her. The protagonist asked if she get anything else to say, and the girl explains that he did not need to worry because that his court was a secret agent with the threatening Lucky. Inor tells Shen to get the book and return immediately, and also should not look at other girls because every time she thought about to eat, she could not help but get angry. She murmurs about Yen are thinking too much about things. At the same instead, the protagonist see something observing, agree aisle in front of him questions if that person would be as escort approaching her the protagonist, as if he could know her name standing up the girl says her name was Yantin, and she was not very talented, but had knowledge in the art of seduction, and if he had a question she would answer, and besides that she could help find lost items. Shen thinks she must be talking about the celestial books. That girl must be as escort, but still she can. The only, and if she was calling her an idiot, at the same instant Shen holds her shoulder, saying he was looking for a last book called Celestial Book. She was surprised by the protagonist's hand, thinking that sensation was incredible, and when she was touched her inner elixir was about to come out, remembering about the only person who do that to her, and questioning of the protagonists was her destined dual cultivate. Observing the girl, Ocean asks if she was alright, but she wasn't, so she had waited for the protagonist for a long time and would take him to his last item, thinking she could not let you go away. She tells him to follow her. At the same instant an old lady was looking around, questioning where was the person she would accompany to the palace. Sometime later the change conference, the protagonist asks why there were so many people in that place, but the girl says that was normal, asking him to look on stage and see if where he was looking for was there, mentioning that the protagonist had a lot of power and should be there for the celestial book because there was a rumor with the person who got it will get the continent, and if a protagonist won is she could help him, but needed help with something. But Shen had already disappeared from her sight, looking of people say something had flown onto the stage. It asks where he was doing because there were two people who were fighting where you could not offend anyway, while one of the people tried to attack the boy. Shen thinks he needed to find the book and leave that place as soon as possible. The man asks if he wanted to take advantage of the fight and steal his treasure, saying he would kill him, launching an attack on the protagonists and seeking his body into the concrete. The man smiles, saying no one would bother him anymore, telling them to resume the discussion about the celestial book, but as he spoke the other man tells him to leave behind. However, it was truly as Shen was already right behind him preparing a punch, but he stops the punch. You in just a light tap on the man's forehead, wrote and far away. Shen thanks him for his guidance, for now the celestial book would be isn't the right. Spectators were surprised because the protagonists gave just a flick on the man's forehead, and yet he was beaten up. The man saying that Shen deserved to win the celestial book, called the other guy asking how long he would stand there, and telling him not to forget what he wanted. However, the guy smiles, saying he was admitting that his skills were not good enough, and for that reason all these loved ones were killed. The man becomes furious with what the guy had said, preparing an act, looking at the sky. The spectators are confused, wondering if it was going to rain, but they still want to see the celestial book known. Towards the old man he asks if the guy had gone crazy, using of protection magic to defend himself, thinking it was already too late. At the same instant fears of light begin to appear around the spectators. However, those fears were not friendly, but he began to explode. And fleeing from the spheres thinks that the old man really used the dark pearls and caused thunders. Moreover, after just half an hour a gigantic area will be hit and can be completely burned, affirming that the protagonist was doomed. The boy was calm in the middle of the fight, saying and plunders were a bit troublesome, pushing the lighting aside as if it were nothing. Should ask the old man if it wasn't true, leaving the man surprised because I was a type of thunder that was enough to peel off the skin of just a touch, but that it just pushed away as if it were nothing. Shen is apprehensive because it burned his clothes, saying that all that was not a big problem for him. Observing the catastrophe in the sky, the protagonist says it was time to eradicate the source, supposing was a great opportunity to test his physical body, but at the same instance something goes towards his face. That was Yet, and who was having the protagonist telling him out to die, asking if the boy was all right and why he was trying to play this hero. However, the lightning bolt was heading towards the two, and Shen asks what kind of rescue. I was pulling something from her bosom. She thinks they had no time, for she lost their opportunity. She might not have a chance of success. Growing up paper on the protagonist head yet, and asked him not to move because that teleportation talisman can be used on once, and no matter how valuable that book was, it was not worth his life. So when she was going to use the talisman, it burns. However, Shen does not teleport, protecting the girl. At the segments sent that lightning strikes that two we at wicked smile. The old man says you can control the skies of the Sir less your book would be his, saying that the protagonist was inferior to him, but someone for as a stone. At the man shit is still standing, affirming that the team Chaosek was really powerful, because summoning a thunder was not for just anyone, but was that what he wanted, asking if you could hear the cries within the thunder. He was reading people's lives as if they were nothing just for a book. Questioning of all that was worth it. How it really old man was not up for conversation, preparing another attack on the boy and saying that the winner is the game in the losers the villain. At the same instant Shen punches the man's face, saying he had a tip for him for the celestial book. all this time was his property using magic on the bookshelf, says he had not seen his old friend for a long time, asking for help from the creature. Then the protagonist uses magic to heal the wounds of the people who keep asking who that man was. Then the boy approaches Yankun, observing her. Shen questions why she did not wake up, thinking of her heartbeat had stopped. Shen is reluctant to touch the girl's bosom, thinking it was too big, but now is not the time to think about that, but to see people, remembering that the harm's on the left side. Shen presses her bosom and realizes there really were no beats, but that conscious girl thinks her heart was on the right side, holding it in his arms. The boy says you should find a secluded place to take a closer look. The girl's embarrassed, thinking they can cultivate. Meanwhile, so would be a win-win situation. The other man seen the protagonist Lee calls him, thinking he would never have thought that a young man like that would end up with the book. At the same instant, one of the servants calls the man. The guy says it was for him to attend to the emphasis, people questioning why he here now. However, the servant whispers something in his ear. The man approaches the protagonist, whispering a code, him saying he was the wrong person with the guy, says he would keep his mouth shut and respect his name all his life, saying his name was Dishing, son of Ham Shin. A surprise when the man mentions his father's name, and Eve, the same insecure, and wakes up sometime later in a mansion. The old man asked for little girl. How was the condition of the injured person? However, she says the doctors have already tried everything, but she did not wake up. Then the old man mentions that he had heard that that woman was the companion of the owner of the celestial book, and the girl says he was correct because she was injured because she was protecting him, asking him to take a look at her. However, he hadn't, was no longer there, hidden. The girl thought that if she pretended to be unconscious they would take care of her, but he simply turned around and left, wondering if he was planning something behind her back. While even walk, she notices one of her talismans, affirming that no matter how much she fled, as long as she had placed one of her talismans, the boy will not escape from her. Observing the door, the girl tries to hear what they were talking about, questioning why they were silent. Then, to solve a problem, she ends up piercing a piece of the door to see from the hole, but she's surprised by what she saw. Shen was simply touching old man's chest. The protagonist, observing the mark on the man's chest, thinks she really was the son of Calm. Dishing says that was done as a mark of his father's teachings and a symbol of his family. Asked of Shen believed him now. Then Shen says he still remembered when his father went to war with him, and in the blink of an eye have grown a lot, asking what was the problem. Dishing says he was afraid of something he did not know. 40 years ago, when his father was about to die, called them to pass the position of city lord, and besides him and his father there was one more person in the room. An unknown figure asked Dishing a huge beat the next owner of the city, mentioning that you seem to be a person with longevity, but Dishing says he was just a son taking his father's place and acting as lord. The person affirms that he was very obedient, and for that reason Khan liked him so much, and besides taking care of the celestial book, she wanted the man to pass on a message with a celestial book, finds its master, inform him to bring the book the future cave back in the present. Dishing says that he should keep this a secret from the enter. The protagonist feels awkward, asking if that was the person he was thinking of, but Zishan confirms that she was his third discipline. Her name was Louis, and saying she had long occupied the southern part of the continent and is considered a sovereign of the world. Should, as surprised as his disciples were out each other pondering about the name of the cave, question seeing if that wasn't the mountain where he made elixir with his third disciple. At that instant, Dishing meals before him. Then the protagonist asks where he was doing. Zishan mentioned that originally the position of city lord was not to be passed to him yet because his father wished to personally receive the owner of the celestial book. With tears in his face, he says you shouldn't bother him with those matters, but he need his help, but chances for other, and he had a lifelong friendships of he couldn't ignore. Asking where his father was, the man says his father was in a deep sleep in the common mountains, asking the protagonist to find his disciple first. You haven't seen that situation goes crazy, saying the protagonist was a pervert and completely misunderstood because it was a lie that Dishing needed to speak with him and secret, and it was just an excuse to do things. Furious, she says she waited a long time for that opportunity, asking if he was playing with the girl. Entering the room, she throws a pillar with the protagonist fallen on the floor, yet mentions that no matter how powerful they smell a bitter pill they would sleep with a mischievous look. The girl's as a high-quality man like that should be hers. However, she notices a glowing school by her side, where she starts to hallucinate. Apparently excited, Yen asks if something like that existed in the celestial book. Steam, something shining. She asks what color that was, questioning what was happening. Sometime later, the girl's in front of the protagonist and instantly sits on top of Shen, starting to undress. Shen, still unconscious, asks if that was the smell of alcoholic elixir, noticing something slippery and soft opening his eyes. The protagonist is surprised seeing the girl on top of him, asking what she was doing. Embarrassed, Shen tries to get up, telling Yangton not to come closer. The boy, recalling his memories before fainting, remembers that Yen invaded the room saying random things and affirming that nothing unusual had happened at that moment. You have been having the protagonist is question about what she was doing when she hisses the boys neck and also keeps sniffing the protagonist, leaving Shen extremely embarrassed, asking him to stop. However, the girl grabs his hand and then starts to lick his finger. She ponders if the cause of that could be what he thought. Observing the celestial book, he realizes it was open, then tells the girl to behave. Then she starts to act like a dog, and the protagonist thinks that was the worst possible son. Ariel, biggest sheriff, stored countless treasures in the celestial book, and to not be discovered he put a spell where all people would receive a brainwash. If they looked at it they would become dogs, and then Shin questions if she had looked at the book, murmuring that he could just sit and do nothing. With a sigh he said that was very troublesome. Slapping the girl's face, she mentions that Yun was lucky because it was the protagonist's. That was a success. Since you've suffered a lot, she should allow the celestial book to bless her, with Hu dreams mentioning that after Yemen woke up the curse would be completely broken, and because he had helped her the girl should keep that a secret. Then Shen says you should visit the fusion cave, besides that you should take advantage of the two being asleep and quickly that place, as it would avoid a problem with having to explained as usually. Even yet, and holds the boys close. Shen asks if she was still awake. Looking at the girl, she says she would definitely protect him, and tears in her face yet, and says she didn't want to be alone, saying the protagonist decides to stay in that place, saying he would wait for her to wake up and then leave. However, the one who wakes up first is this dishing, questioning how he had fallen asleep and where Shen was so on time. Later, when the protagonist Decibels asks for servant why she had not returned yet, but the girl says that when she got there the protagonist had already left the city. The other woman says that was absurd, because she was the oldest disabled, so Shen couldn't leave without saying goodbye, but the girl mentioned that she had heard about a woman who saved his life and ended up in a coma, the protagonist's disciples, so she was saying that just so she wouldn't die. However, the servant says that she was looking for the medicine to save her life, where he ended up taking her with him. The vampire smiles because the protagonist was still the same, because he still liked we girls. Then she starts to change clothes, mentioning that she would personally give the order to invite Shen back to the city. One of her servants said she couldn't do that. However, she falls silent when she sees the impressive look, asking as she was trying to tell her what to do. At the same instead, the servant kneels, asking for forgiveness from the empress. Thinking about the current situation, she sighs, saying that the elder of the blood river have become a strong person in the realm of life and death, and began to recruit troops in the north too. She couldn't leave the city. Then one of the empress generals appears, saying they were her orders. The emperor gives the order for her to bring the protagonist in her place, and also wish that she spread a message. Shon tells her not to worry, because the Kenyu in a continent was just a place back to the protagonist Siams, and had already woken up, asking where she was in. Shen questions how she could be so annoying to get rid of her used to hiding ability of the celestial book, but didn't know why she still appeared. The girl says that smell was still and that place, and the protagonist wonders if the girl was still being a dog, pulling something from her bosom. She says she couldn't do anything about it, and although the talisman was valuable, if it was used on the protagonist it will be a waste, because you find him. Then Shen wonders if she still hadn't given up destroying the girl's talisman. Then he entered, notices the boy, the protagonist thinks she could no longer find him, because no matter the reason, he definitely couldn't take her to Philly Cave. However, Yen whispers, asking if the boy ate her polishes him, because she has the arena to ring the change conference where she causing many problems, but the desire to save him, even have the chance of dying, was real. The protagonist watches the girl talking, becoming reluctant to say anything, saying that her time was limited, but she had a wish to fulfill. Before I'm mentioning that she tried many times and now is convinced that Shen was the only one who could help her, saying that he could laugh as much as he wanted because you work for nothing. However, before agreeing to help her, she asked the boy not to give up, because she wanted the protagonist to treat her like a dog, and she was willing to do anything to accept it. Then Shen sighs and deactivate is invisibility, making you unhappy because you really showed up, thanking him, saying she wouldn't cause any more trouble, questioning if the protagonist liked dogs, and there was no reason to use the celestial book because he could pretend. However, the boy doesn't say a word since he activated the book, and thing that was good because he was willing to help. At that moment the girl stamp in the chest as she falls to the ground, pan, and has no idea what happened, questioning why happy that way. However, Shen also didn't know what happened. She was talking, and at the same moment she fainted, but at this moment the protagonist notices something. Looking around, Shen realizes that was something in that place. At that moment the empress appears before the boy. Shant asks if that was the enter, and the girl questions why he didn't keep his promise, and if you go back on his word. The boys are reluctant, saying it wasn't that. Then the empress says he could have at least sent a letter to her, asking if it wasn't worth thinking about. However, the protagonist says it really wasn't worth it, striking the empress, seeing the girl chance as she was no, that if the same moment the Emperor's produces to his soul the boy mentions that it was expected, because it was just a timer, explaining that timers were spirits that fed on cultivators' emotions using illusions to enter their minds, maintaining the illusion until their target was completely drained. Shen supposes that Yun fainted because of that, but the night was the best opportunity for spirits to manipulate their illusions, questioning why they were appearing during the day. Observing the girl, the protagonist sees the spirits trying to possess her, however Shit makes a hand sign that ends up dissipating spirits, but something was wrong because she was still fainted, making him wonder if the girl was lost to be completely eroded that him yet and past. A girl was sitting asking if her sister won or crystallized hawk, however when she looks back there was only a pile of corpses and says it's no use because she's always been alone, thinking that everyone in the world wanted her dead, being hunted countless times and escaping. Question, seeing how long it would last. Then a woman calls the little girl, calling her disciple, wonders if she still left one person alive, questioning what she was saying. Standing up, the woman asks her not to move because she would tell her the details. Same issues, the great seer, they actually want you sacked, and some time ago they sent her a message to travel 100 miles west to find her destined disciple Sir Kos. Luckily the girl asked if she could call her master and if she was willing to give anything she wanted her life, stabbing a woman, saying she met many people like that wanting to use the term disciple to drag her to an elixir shop. As soon as the cultivators found out that can refine for the girl the etiquette, justice, or laws of the heavens were gone back to the present, Yen asks why they couldn't just leave her alone, but the same moment she starts to get weak because she had exhausted or cultivation, questioning of her life was coming to end, and he entered had no family or friends of her life would just end, saying she killed countless evildoers in her life because she had no choice, begging the heavens to have a normal life. However, two voice behind the girl asks why she would wait until the next life. Looking to the side, realizes that woman was silly alive, saying she could do that in this life. At all the master should do is transfer her energy to save Yankton. Then the girl starts to cry, asking if she can really continue living. Then the one it confirms, saying she could have a good life from now on, but sometime later her master was dead yet, and tells her not to be afraid because it was her turn to save her. All she needed to do is find a person with a secret body and perform to walk cultivation back to the present. Chances the spirit was eating the girl, so she couldn't hold on much longer, saying she'd take care of it quickly. Then a multitude of emperor's clones appears, having the protagonists and calling him to have fun, asking if you wanna her front or back, but at the same moment Shen uses a spell suppressing the spirits. However, one was still alive, mentioning that the boy was very the strong, asking of shit like that game, saying that you enter was grown fond of him. Then the spirit steps on the protagonist, saying that women prefer to be dominant, so we should say they're like a good boy. But suddenly the girl starts to feel her abdomen burning, asking what the boy was doing, holding her foot, and questions if she didn't know there was a pleasure point, an acupuncture point where he could provide a very pleasurable experience. Since the emperor gets embarrassed, telling him to let her go, then the protagonist starts charging an attack, mentioning that to fight her he should leave as human desires and focus on the goals, and giving her even more pleasure. She revealed her true form of Shen, let her escape. He wouldn't know how many victims there would be. Desperate, the spirit says she was really enter, asking how he could be so cruel to make her suffer. How, over the voices, the name Yana could not be mentioned from her mouth. She was left behind after going for the refinement penalty to protect the sect, taking the poison from her bones for a whole month without shedding a single tear, and instead she felt sorry for her younger sisters hiding in a corner in the dark, blaming herself for not meeting her expectations, asking how Ubenter could seduce others for her own desires because he was just something driven by lust, stealing others' memories and ridiculing them, questioning if that made her feel superior. Then strikes the spirit, revealing its true form. Seeing and fallen on the ground, the spirit thinks that grows still lost in her illusions, or she could take over her body and start over, but at the same moment she sliced in half. However, that wasn't the protagonist, or did that, observing where it was the resort in that place. Then an unknown figure appears that was the girl of the emperor since and before. A legend says that in a moral exile to the west of the Kenyu and consonant create a secret technique where two cultivators swallowed a mysterious stone to sacrifice their spiritual fetuses to the outer world. With the blessing of the blood formation, the two could communicate freely with each other in a dish into sharing their cultivation realms and experiences. The person who created this technique called it psychic interlude. Then the woman says that he still remember year. She mentions that her spiritual fetus was a red product seen only once every 10,000 years. Then the one asks question was retreating because you were having fun with the spirit, had forgotten to return to the cities. The party agonists feels embarrassed, asking if she had seen that situation. However, the girl says she saw everything from beginning to end, and besides that Yen already knew everything, asking if the protagonist was looking for medicine for Yanton, and that's why he wasn't returning to the city, leaving Shen confused, not knowing knowing what she was talking about. Then the boy tells everything to the woman, thinking that girl, and come to find him to send a message from enter about not looking at other women. The girl says that even if it were misunderstood, why would he hadn't keep following animal that way, but should mention that she had a hidden motives because she needed his help. Thinking about the protagonist's words, that girl thinks that he didn't recognize her as a woman. Shen says he didn't know what you should help with, but when she was being corroded by the spirit, the girl called him master, asking if Chun thought he didn't meddle in other people's affairs. However, the girl remained silent. Remember her past, when you protected him, and that she couldn't worry about that, mentioning that now she was the supreme demon, and everyone called her a killer and fighter. But Shen says that was absurd, because if that were the case, Yanton would have died many times, and besides, that girl was not a bad person. She must suffer a lot for 100 years, and now that Shen's back, the woman was free. Even if the world ended, the protagonist would help her embarrass John. Says she understands, and now that her master's here, she should worry about those things, mentioning that when he finishes taking care of things, you should return immediately to the city, and if it happened again, and she would personally cut off his legs. Then at the same woman, or begins to approach. That's Shen feels embarrassing that situation with Shon on top of the saying that he shouldn't look when women were checking each other's heartbeats, so he would walk through the forest, thinking that since Chun was there, he didn't need to worry about the girl, and could finally go to Flood's cave. The same moment the woman froze a sword, saying that if he thought it was, he should just closed his eyes, but you should leave or sight. It was an order from the Empress. Shit, observing that girl with a threatening look, questions why she was so difficult to deal with, saying he would do as she asked, asking how, and was then chance as the spirit entered her interior, corroding her spiritual fetus, stating that it would be difficult to deal with, and can only use one way to fix it. But first, the girl should wake up. Analyzing the situation, Shen thinks that doing that would bring damage to the physical body, questioning if that was a new technique created by later generations. And the protagonist realizes that China taken off her clothes, and when the woman looks back, the boy realizes that she reacted to it while continuing the treatment. She feels embarrassed, thinking he should look at all wildly if the day passes, or Chan had already completed the treatment, mentioning that the girl won't wake up soon, so now she could relax. Boy, she look at the protagonist. He was exhausted, saying she had done a good job. Realizing the boy was exhausted, China asks when it happened, but she gives a sarcastic smile, thinking of she still didn't know, saying that the spirit and hurt, and so he would destroy their den. However, the Empress and already set people to deal with it. Then the protagonist says you're treated him very well, offering her food, but China been fasting for 3 years. She tries to convince her in various ways to let him go, but only managed to make her angry, saying the only thing should do is stay there. But the boy still insisted, stating he wanted to go. Number 2, then the one in for as a piece of wood, him saying go ahead, but the protagonist says to leave it. Then she mentions that the girl's vitality was very damaged, and every method she did was only temporary, stating that elixir would be needed to nurture, but it was already late, so they should look now. Besides that, after all that work, she was too tired to think about it, suggesting they rest. Of the protagonist says you could go rest because he would watch, and at the same moment the woman falls to the ground. Should apologize is because you pressed her sleep points, or she could rest well. Then the protest's going to leave that place. However, the two are fully awake, cutting to Yen are combing her hair while saying that she was a good person because he felt sorry for the weak and helped the young, but this time felt that there was something different, so this time it was not to follow too closely, seeing if he was really helping her back to the present. Awake, thinks that silver hair and animal ears were certainly military general who worked for the emperor, stating that in that way she would definitely fall. The protagonist then gets up, trying to say something to her, but realizes something because when she sees that her clothes were completely torn, questioning if when she was sleeping they did something to her. Realizing that the girl's already awake, Shon talks about her being enchanted by spirit, so she should move, being surprised when she remembers everything she had done. After all, Oliver planning she didn't expect to be controlled by spirit, thinking that if she was safe now was because she had helped her as she was leaving chances to stay in that place. Then and asks if she would find Shen, asking to go with her because she should thank him with her body for risking his life to save her, leaving the woman furious, saying she never thought Yen value friendship so much, and asks what she was talking about because only a low-class person wouldn't return gratitude. Then Sean asked her to repay with her body because she was the one who saved her. The girl becomes extremely sad because all it was a fancy of her thoughts. Then the wouldn't draw your sword, casting a spell on Yet and saying she was not in a position to be against the emperors because she was just one among millions who could not compete with her, so she was to stay there because the spell would protect her. As she walks away, she wonders why the emperors desire the protagonist so much and no one else. Remembering her moments with the empress champions, begins to get emotional, But when she looks to the side, that girl was still following her, asking why she had come along, and if her spell hadn't worked. However, Yemen says she had her own ways if she should worry something. She had underestimated her, and now needed a more powerful move. Returning to the protagonist, he says he had finally arrived before at giant place that was fun cave. Meanwhile, the boy remembered his moments with his disciple, seeing with a little girl. It was a spiritual centipede that appeared only in places with a lot of spiritual energy. Lawyer and asks why they needed to find a place to cultivate elixir, because it cultivators should or sit in practice meditation. Shinzo, she was right, asking if she remembered why he found his sect, and the little girl asks if it was to see paradise, given hope to the poor. The protagonist affirms that was it because it was the desire of his heart, but merely having supernatural powers was not enough to achieve it, because true power must be beneficial to the world, and that Lilian found an ideal place to cultivate elixir that could help people. Loy asked not to worry because she would turn that place into a paradise. Returning to the present, Shen mentions I was very nostalgic, thinking that lawyer and become a woman of respect, and besides he remembers those two girls pretending to be asleep and probably now were following his false body, so we should thank China for showing his flaws. However, the protagonist think that was not right, but you should focus on that first, and then you make peace with them later, saying they should reach his false body so soon. Returning to the 2 years and was in an extremely suspicious position. Embarrassed, Shone asks what she was doing, however the girl hovers her mouth telling her to be quiet. John asks if she would leash and alone, because it was a waste for yet nerd think of him as a gentleman yet, and says you and or stands how she feels because he was expressing his thanks to a tree, and a woman thinks she can report what was happening to you. Enter because it would dirty her ears. Seeing the girl half naked, Choke asked her to wait but yet says she was going to hell anyway, so she should let her extinguish that desire. Back to the protagonists, he wonders was talking about him as he looks to the side. Shan asks if that was it when spirits, saying that when spirits only appear in places have a lot of spiritual energy, so she had done a good job. However, when he enters the cave, a grotesque creature was watching him, leaving the poor protagonist confused because he thought there would be a paradise. At the same moment, the monster tries to attack the protagonist. Immediately, the boy changes his gaze, slicing that creature that he punches the ground, revealing an unknown place. So she asks if she had enough, observing that spirit was really Zluin. Seeing Shen, she's happy, mentioning she hadn't seen him for a long time, asking if she had scared him. But the protagonist says that the monsters in the cave were just illusions, and she and improve your skills. The girl affirms that Shen was the person who understood her the most. Then the protagonist as asked why she was hiding from her senior sister, and why she was in that form. However, lawyer and says that her soul hadn't left her body on its own because she had died. With a fearful look, the protagonist becomes furious, asking who had done that to her, but Sluyan asks him to calm down, because she prepared this for herself, saying could see of his own eyes, mentioning that during the time he wasn't there are many people set their sights on his sack, where they were again in danger of being extinguished, but yet entering she remembered his teaching step by step, improving their skills, are able to overcome this crisis completely. And after everything was over, the had to change the sect's name, but even so, Aunt Loyan's memories in her says that all the plays they interfered with the sect were examined, and now they just had to wait for Sen to return from asking why she wanted to leave, but Lue and says she was being too rigid because they couldn't do as they please, and at that rate I might end up for an old. However, the girl holds Year's hand, mentioning that everything was fine, the responsibility of taking care of the sect was not hers alone, and so she should worry because she is old Louis and would be the master's favorite, asking if you like that happen. As she leaves, the girl apologizes, mentioning that the visionary revealed that someone had planned all of that and she found out she would do everything, and then so she didn't want her to look at her and that ways before asking if her master really understood in those turbulent times that was the only family she had. And after that bloody battle she escaped with the spiritual fetus, setting up a decoy and building the city of Changed You. With that, John Khan waited for him to return. Pension says she did a good job, so she shouldn't worry because he would have a new chip sculpture of a strong base for her using the core of his brain. Lar mentions that her master was the best, but that would be more difficult than she thought because she was still a cultivate of the realm of life and death, leaving the protagonist surprised because she had surpassed him in cultivation level, while her body was sanctifying everything. Boils down to the matter of her cultivation, saying she was just in around the sculptor divinity, questioning if there was an opponent that even Luin, who was in the realm of life and death, was not able to defeat. The girl says that was she looked he was at the level of the fourth turbulations, and Sivan, after escaping with a spiritual fetus, he tried to strengthen her body, but couldn't, asking if the boy had just come out of seclusion bench, and asks if she thought the protagonist would lose, so looming, and so she knew the boy will try to face them head on, questioning if he would win with the crushing victory. And at the same moment she takes a drop of her salad, leaving the boy confused, asking what that was. A girl replies that it was the reason she stayed in that place, because it was a fetus made with the ingredients she gathered. Hearing what the girl said, she asks if she was lying because a wonderful pill like that should be used on herself, saying she had done that with her spiritual fetus, and the girl starts laughing, saying was was expected of her. Master Chef starts to leave the room, telling her no wait there and not to worry about the break as he would return soon, but at the same moment a hand thrust into his chest lawyer and mentioned that she for him an opening and finally got him started to cast a spell on the protagonist. Realizing it was his spiritual fetus, the protagonist asked her to take it back, but the girl asked him to say hello to Yahello for her because the two of them were always a family. To Luan, dissipating and disparate fragments. Shen says that Luan have been maintained. Floods came alone, all that time here overlap, but never asked of push yourself, so hard. Mention starts to lead to cave in front of a magical tree. He apologizes, saying he would come back the heavenly book and nurture souls, so he kept her soul of in the book and will disperse. Remembering that Louis and always liked to travel, he asks why they didn't take a walk. Returning to the two girls, a full the protagonist incredible aura questioning what was happening now. If the same moment Shin's clone explodes, next Chunk grips her sword, sensing a gigantic energy heading towards her. Seeing and fallen on the ground, she asks what was wrong with the girl. Thinks her core would only react that way when it senses secret court, so that would be her best chance. She mentions that she didn't seem well, questioning if this previous treatment wasn't complete, leaving that and surprised because she was worried. Remember her moments with their master. She thinks she couldn't give up, using a spell to bind the woman, affirming that you go after Shen because he was a rare sanctified body, not seen for over 100 years, and now she did finally replenish her master's internal dan to extend his life. At the same moment Chum removes the spell, asking if she didn't expect three defeat her, and if they even let her handle he enters affairs. Maybe she could ignore her actions, but that was out of the question because it was too much questioning. If that was how master had caught her insulting her then yet, and tells her to take back what she said, asking what her useless had to do. Their master, using a spell again to buy the woman. Looking at her chest, Sean realized, as soon as seal information, not knowing when you didn't have placed it. The girl says that formation could only be dispelled by rotation, and only those in the realm of life and death could deactivate. Shot asked if she had planned all that, but the girl says she never lied to him, because she was the imperfect type who relied on those cheap tactics, because without a master teacher she ended up having to learn on her own, thinking if she thought she didn't want a better life and give for all to assure a path for her master, affirming she had done everything she could and had no choice but to resort to those methods too. She would protect her master no matter what she had to do. That a statue appears, saying that was the spirit leaving, and surprised, asking when he was doing that place. The statue mentions that the course she offered were made with inferior ingredients from spiritual beasts, and if she paid him using her body her heart will be saved, saying he felt incredible amount ingredients and her body, so he would bring it back to him in